Why buying an airport isn't the money machine. It looks like on the surface, owning an airport seems like the ultimate cash flow fantasy. Grab some land, pour a runway, let planes land, and collect fees forever. It's the modern equivalent of a toll booth. One way in, one way out. And everyone who wants to use it has to pay you. No rival airport springs up next door. You're the only game in town, so you just sit back and watch the revenue roll in. That picture isn't entirely false, but there's a wide gap between the fantasy and the reality. The enormous upfront cost of entry, the relentless expense of simply staying open, what happens when global air travel grinds to a halt, and why even the most sophisticated infrastructure investors on Earth, firms managing hundreds of billions of dollars, have still lost staggering sums on airports that looked, on paper, like sure things. Who actually sells an airport? For most of the 20th century, airports were public infrastructure, built and owned by governments, funded by taxpayers. That began shifting in the 1980s when governments recognized the value sitting on their books, and private investors realized a monopoly with guaranteed traffic was exactly the kind of asset worth holding for decades. What followed was a global privatization wave, spanning more than 90 countries. Today, over 850 airports worldwide carry some form of private ownership. In Europe, roughly 3/4 of all passenger traffic flows through privately owned airports. In Latin America, the figure is similar. The United States is the outlier. Nearly all American airports remain under city or state ownership, JFK, LAX, O'Hare, and Atlanta included. The one major exception is Luis Muñoz Marine International in San Juan, Puerto Rico, privatized under a federal pilot program. Part of the reason is financial plumbing. U.S. airports rely heavily on tax-exempt municipal bonds that private buyers simply can't tap into, which makes the privatization math far less attractive stateside. Governments typically part with airports in one of three ways: an outright sale, a long-term concession, handing over control for 40 to 99 years before reverting ownership, or a public share offering. Concessions have become the favored route because they let governments cash in without permanently giving up the asset. A striking example: Australia leased Sydney Airport for 99 years back in 2002, and 2 decades later a group of Australian pension funds bought full control for roughly 32 billion Australian dollars, the largest infrastructure acquisition in the country's history. Why would anyone pay that much? Investors typically price an airport as a multiple of its EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, usually 15 to 23 times annual EBITDA for a healthy asset. The Sydney deal closed during the pandemic, when travel had cratered, meaning buyers weren't paying for 2022's depressed earnings. They were paying for decades of future monopoly cash flow in a major city. That's the essential logic of airport ownership. You're not buying today's numbers, you're buying permanent control of a choke point for as long as aviation exists. Building one from scratch. Buying an existing airport is one path. Building a new one is a different order of difficulty entirely. Land. A modern international airport needs somewhere between 50 and 140 square kilometers of flat, legally cleared land. Denver International alone covers an area bigger than the city of San Francisco. Before a single foundation is poured, acquiring that land, settling legal title, compensating displaced residents, and clearing environmental restrictions can cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Runways. These aren't roads. They're heavily engineered structures built to absorb a 400-ton aircraft landing at speed, tens of thousands of times a year, for 100 years or more. A single major runway typically costs over $1 billion in developed countries. When Heathrow proposed a third runway, estimates ran between $13 and $18 billion for one runway at a site that already had supporting infrastructure. For comparison, Gatwick's entire airport sold for $1.5 billion in 2009. A decade later, a single new runway there was projected to cost 8 times that amount. Terminals. These function more like small cities than buildings. Underground baggage networks moving thousands of bags an hour, massive climate control systems, security lanes meeting government explosive detection standards, jet bridges fitted to dozens of aircraft types, and backup power for every critical system, running non-stop 365 days a year. Beijing-Daxing cost around $17 billion to build. The first phase of Istanbul's new airport ran about $12 billion, and even after construction, there's still environmental review, noise studies, community consultations, and legal challenges, routinely adding 3 to 5 years and hundreds of millions of dollars before the first flight ever lands. The interest rate trap. Here's the mechanism that quietly wrecks more airport projects than anything else. Once you borrow money to build, interest starts accruing the day the loan lands in your account, not the day construction finishes, not the day the first plane arrives. Every month of delay is a month of paying interest on billions in debt while earning zero revenue. Berlin-Brandenburg Airport is the textbook case. Originally slated to open in 2011, it didn't open until 2020, 9 years late. The budget ballooned from roughly 2 billion euros to about 7 billion euros, more than triple the original estimate, and it finally opened into a pandemic that had gutted global air travel. A veteran advisor on the project publicly warned it might never turn a profit and could require permanent government subsidy. What caused the delay wasn't materials, labor, or weather. It was a smoke extraction fire safety system that failed testing after being integrated too late in the build. Every discovered flaw triggered a construction halt and redesign. Then the fire code itself changed, forcing another round of redesigns. Undocumented cabling made inspections nearly impossible without ripping out finished work. Escalators were missized, doors malfunctioned, roofs leaked. No single failure was catastrophic. Together, they cost roughly 4 billion euros in delays. Denver International had its own version of this in the 1990s, a $200 million automated baggage system that shredded luggage during testing pushed the opening back 16 months on a project that ultimately cost $4.8 billion. Each day the airport sat unopened cost the city an estimated $1.1 million in interest and operating expenses. Two very different revenue streams. Once an airport is finally operating, its income splits into two distinct categories. Aeronautical revenue comes from airlines, landing fees tied to aircraft weight, per passenger charges, and apron parking fees. At Heathrow, a wide-body landing can cost an airline around $9,000, and each departing passenger generates roughly $55 in fees. That sounds lucrative, and it is, but governments almost everywhere cap what airports can charge, precisely because an unregulated monopoly could charge whatever it wanted. In the UK, regulators cut Heathrow's allowed per-passenger charge by nearly 20% for the 2022 to 2026 period, a decision Heathrow fought in a lengthy dispute, arguing the cap was too low to fund needed investment. The takeaway: the government sets the ceiling on aeronautical income, and it's always lower than airports would prefer. Non-aeronautical revenue is the workaround, and it's now the real engine of airport profitability. Globally, it makes up around 37% of total airport income, sometimes over 40% in Europe and Asia, and it's growing faster than aeronautical revenue almost everywhere. In the US, parking alone is the single biggest contributor. Parking and ground transport account for roughly 46% of commercial revenue, with Dallas-Fort Worth pulling in over $250 million a year, from parking and LAX close to $180 million. No regulator caps parking rates the way they cap landing fees. Retail works through minimum annual guarantee contracts. Tenants pay either a fixed percentage of gross sales, commonly 16 to 20%, or a guaranteed minimum, whichever is higher, protecting the airport's downside while letting it profit fully from a good year. Terminal design reinforces this. After security, layouts often shift to lower ceilings and softer lighting to signal it's safe to relax, that is, spend. Forced walk-through paths. Funnel passengers directly through duty-free zones, boosting sales by up to 60% versus off-to-the-side shops, and corridors are deliberately curved leftward, since most travelers pull luggage right-handed and naturally glance right toward premium retail. The costs that never go away. The catch is that airports carry enormous fixed costs regardless of how many passengers show up. Security screening equipment must meet evolving government standards, no negotiation, no delay, and roughly 41% of airports report real financial strain just from mandated security upgrades. Baggage systems require constant power and specialized maintenance. Utilities run at a scale comparable to several city blocks of office space, operating non-stop. Firefighting crews must be staffed around the clock even for one overnight cargo flight. Airports in snowy regions need entire fleets of plows and de-icers on permanent standby. None of this scales down when traffic drops. Only revenue does. When air travel stopped early 2020 delivered the worst-case scenario for a business built on fixed costs and variable revenue. By April, roughly two-thirds of the world's commercial aircraft were grounded, and global airline passenger revenue fell by over $400 billion for the year, a 69% collapse. Runways still needed plowing, bond payments still came due, insurance and utilities didn't pause. Retail tenants under minimum guarantee contracts couldn't pay with zero customers, and forcing the issue would have bankrupted them, leaving empty storefronts that would hurt the airport for years afterward. The smarter operators suspended the guarantees and shifted tenants to pure sales percentage deals, sacrificing short-term income to preserve the retail ecosystem. Some airports also converted terminals into makeshift cargo hubs, using empty gates and even passenger cabins to keep freight and revenue moving. The small airport trap airports handling fewer than 1 million passengers a year almost always lose money. There simply isn't enough retail and parking activity to cover the cost of staying open 24/7. Many survive purely because governments subsidize them for political reasons, regional development, rural connectivity. Those trying to grow without government support often fall into a different trap: dependency on a single low-cost carrier. Airlines like Ryanair have built a business model around this leverage, offering to bring passenger volume in exchange for landing fees cut by half and marketing payments that function as outright subsidies. The airport has little choice: empty gates without the airline, thin margins with it. And the arrangement is fragile, threaten to walk, and the airline can hollow out the terminal overnight. Ghost airports. The most expensive mistake in this business is building an airport nobody actually needs. Ciudad Real. Central Airport in Spain is the classic example. Built during the mid-2000s construction boom as an alternative to Madrid, with one of Europe's longest runways and capacity for 10 million passengers a year. It opened in 2008. Its operator was bankrupt within 2 years, and it closed by 2012. Airlines had no interest in serving a city of 75,000 people 2 hours from Madrid. A bankruptcy auction once drew a bid of just 10,000 euros, rejected. It eventually sold in 2018 for 56 million euros, about 5% of its construction cost. Today it stores retired aircraft. Sri Lanka's Matala Rajapaksa International Airport tells a similar story. Built for around $290 million using Chinese loans, designed for 1 million annual passengers, it now sees roughly 12 passengers a day while the government pays over $20 million a year in debt service. Part of the facility has reportedly been used to store rice. Both cases share the same root cause: construction driven by political ambition rather than actual airline demand. Airlines know where passengers want to fly, build somewhere they won't go, and no amount of infrastructure fixes that. What success looks like. Spain's INA Group, which runs 46 domestic airports plus international assets, reported 2024 revenue of 5.8 billion euros and an EBITDA margin around 60%, an extraordinary figure compared to the 10% considered healthy in most industries. Commercial revenue grew faster than passenger numbers, which themselves topped nearly 370 million across the network. Frankfurt tells a related story. As one of Europe's busiest connecting hubs, airlines can't easily route around it, not for lack of alternatives, but because too many connecting passengers expect it as a transfer point. That's the real distinction between airport tiers. Small airports need airlines to survive, large hub airports become destinations, airlines can't afford to skip. Where the industry is heading. The emerging model is the aerotropolis. Instead of a city growing toward an airport, the airport becomes the anchor and the city grows around it, with logistics parks, hotels, and commercial zones clustering nearby to benefit from air connectivity. Airports increasingly monetize this by leasing surrounding land, creating stable income unrelated to passenger counts. Inside the terminal, the focus is on cutting friction, particularly at security, since every minute in a queue is a minute not spent shopping. Biometric systems that match face, passport, and boarding pass in real time are being rolled out to make security feel closer to tapping into a subway turnstile, freeing up more time and money for the retail floor. So is it actually profitable? It depends almost entirely on scale. Airports under 1 million annual passengers typically lose money outright. Fixed costs can't be spread thin enough. Mid-sized hubs in the 15 to 25 million passenger range tend to hit the sweet spot. Non-aeronautical revenue scales faster than costs, and parking and retail contracts become genuinely lucrative. Mega hubs above 40 million passengers, like INA's network, can post extraordinary margins despite facing the heaviest regulatory scrutiny and capital demands. Across the industry, average net margins sit around 16%, modest sounding but immense in absolute dollars given the scale of revenue involved. The swings between a good year and a bad one aren't usually about passenger counts changing dramatically. They're about shifts in per-passenger spending, interest rates, or disruptions that hit revenue while costs stay locked in place. That fixed cost floor, present whether the terminal is packed or empty, is what actually keeps airport investors up at night, far more than competition or regulation. The distance between a fully booked day and a grounded one is where fortunes are made and where they're lost. In the end, owning an airport isn't really owning a business. It's owning a piece of infrastructure that compels every airline serving your city to pay you, every traveler to pass through your shops, and every driver to park in your lots. Done right, in the right city, at the right scale, it's one of the most durable positions in business. The real question is whether you can survive long enough to get there.